Thank you, Amo, for excellent talk. JNU Collective, thank you very much. As a former JNU student, let me first congratulate you on what I think is an excellent initiative. You know, I've spoken in this room in another life only to do class campaigns. Like almost a decade and a half. It's wonderful to be back here. By the time I finished reading Amok's book, I developed a severe toothache. I'm in the middle of a root canal, so I'm overdosed on antibiotics. So I won't do it extempore. My head is a little hazy, but I'll try and read it down. I think it's an excellent book, and all of you should read it. And as somebody who's not trained in political science, I say it's an excellent book because it's easily approachable to anybody who's interested in the topic, rather than very well versed with the literature. Now, to get a journalist to comment on a book, has its upside and its downside. The biggest downside is that I am not well versed with the literature. For an academic, the extent literature is perhaps the most important motivation for writing a book. That is how you judge a book, whether it makes any new contribution to that or not. But the upside of getting a journalist is that we, because of our profession, are forced discernible observers of politics. So we watch on an everyday basis what is happening. And if you do this long enough, you develop a viewpoint, and if you probably train in JNU, you develop a framework also. So it is from that framework that I try and approach that book. The book, the biggest strengths of the book to my mind are that one, it looks at both the demand side and the supply side of the what it calls the backstage of democracy problem, and it sort of concludes that what is happening is a dialectical process. So it's not the political party driving the consultant or vice versa. And this is something which, as somebody who's been trained in CSP, I tend to naturally agree with. What I want to do is approach the book and the topic as a whole with what I think is my framework. And the way I see it, there are three broad, party agnostic strands in Indian politics, which have, I think, developed and taken deep roots in the last decade and a half, perhaps. The first is a tendency of centralization of political power. So it's basically political power at the level of the CMO and the PMO in government, and that is how elections are fought. Elections are fought as, say, a prime minister candidate or a chief minister candidate. In the BJP's case, even in state elections, when a chief minister candidate has not been known, it is called, the double engine sarkar. They have become extremely personality-centric. So that's there. And like Amok said, the tendency has been there from Indira Gandhi days, but now we are perhaps at the peak of this tendency. The second political strand, which I think is very important, is the centrality of welfare in the political narrative at every level of political competition. So it will be some cash transfer here, there, this, that. And, beyond the point, I think what this basically means is that the attribution aspect has become extremely important. That the leader, which could be, say, an incumbent chief minister or a prime minister or a wannabe chief minister or a prime minister, wants a direct relationship between him and her or the voter and the voter. So it is exactly, basically like this is what I am giving to the voter. So if Mamata Banerjee is using IPAC, she is using it exactly for this purpose. This is what, and this is across parties. This is not just one party. And the third factor, which I think is extremely important, is that it is now a broad acceptance of the TINA factor that in this country you cannot have economic development without big capital. And this is not even capital versus government. This is now big capital. Even provincial capital is not needed. Every state government in this country is now doing business with big capital. All of them have their investment conclaves and things like that. No, I don't need to tell you what is happening here. Now, important as these developments are to my mind, they cannot wish away the fundamental key real political constraint which a politician faces in India. Now, you can be a Narendra Modi or a Mamata Banerjee or a Hemant Soren or Yogi Adityanath, but in a parliamentary style democracy of a post the past system, your fortunes basically depend on the people you nominate. Because ultimately, you are not on the ticket. It is ultimately those 543 MPs or whatever number of MLAs you have nominated to contest elections. Whether you come to power or not depends on how they perform. So this, I think, is basically the most important political constraint facing any leader, no matter how authoritarian, no matter how popular, whatever it is. Now, if I am a local level leader aspiring to get into the legislature or the parliament, I, barring a very few exceptions which I think are becoming negligible by the day, my basic motivation to enter politics is to maximize my own resources. Everybody enters politics with rent seeking. Anybody who says otherwise on a medium term basis is basically lying. Now, how do you do that? You do that basically vis-a-vis rent seeking, because you'll earn a cut from how government is functioning. Now, the more this local level guy earns a cut, the more the politician at the top will face a dent in his or her popularity. because that is exactly what hurts the the prime minister or the chief minister. So how do you and if a politician says that I will not allow any of this, then basically you will get a bunch of candidates who will not have a dime to spend on elections, and they will therefore not be in elections. I think the best example of that is the Aam Aadmi Party in this city. In 2015, when they broke up with a bunch of people who used to be with them earlier, like Anand Kumar and I'm not for a moment passing value judgment on all this. They decided that they need to do business with the local entrenched elite in Delhi, and they said, these idealists do good for nothing people cannot be in the party. They made that choice that we will actually have people who are locally entrenched people, who are the local elite, the corrupt elite, etc. So this is the framework in which Indian politics has been operating for some time. I think the biggest squeeze on rent-seeking activities in India came from a technological disruption. It did not come from a political disruption. That technological disruption started during UPA 2, completely materialized during the first Modi government, and that is the JAM Trinity, which is basically direct benefit transfers. And this is something which Narendra Modi makes a very big deal of, and I think for the right reasons. Because what happened with JAM Trinity was, Nandan Nilekani built an Aadhaar database, and then Modi did the the Jan Dhan Yojana thing, which basically give you financial inclusion. The amount of welfare benefits which are being transferred directly to beneficiaries, and the local MLA or corporator or MP has absolutely no agency in this, is astounding. This has been a tectonic shift in Indian policy in the last decade. If you go on the field during elections, this is exactly what people will tell you. That the intermediary has been gotten rid of. And of course, I'm not saying for a moment that there is zero corruption, but corruption has fallen down significantly because those people just don't have an agency. Once the basic paperwork has been done, then basically money comes on its own. So that's there. But this is not enough. If as a prime minister or a chief minister you are actually doing this, then the local MP or the MLA has absolutely no incentive to champion this narrative, because he's basically being asked to dig his own grave. Because if everything is coming from the center or the state government to the voter directly, what agency, what rent-seeking opportunities does he have? So the top leadership of the party, or the person heading the campaign, or the person on the ticket basically, needs somebody to sincerely champion this narrative, which his local rank and file, barring the organizational disruption which Amok talked about, does not have a material incentive to do. So that is one important thing I think which has happened. The second important change in politics is what I would like to call, and bear with me for taking liberties with language, I think it's a fragmentation of subaltern politics. In the early 1990s, if you were say Lalu Yadav or Mulayam Singh Yadav, I mean, just you were enough to consolidate the entire OBC base. That is not going to happen. You actually have to field, say, one lower OBC candidate in this constituency, other lower OBC candidate in that constituency, etc. It's become a very fragmented polity. I'm not passing a value judgment on it again. But once again, election after election, we have seen that this is how successful or not so successful parties, this has been a very important ingredient of electoral strategy in terms of who you feed. Now, this I think once again needs, and Amok talks about it in great detail in his book in a different perspective, needs intelligence gathering of a level, especially in terms of putting up candidates, etc., which your local leadership of the party will have a lot of incentive to sabotage. Because if, say, a person from caste X has been in the local leadership of the party in a given area, he or she would have a lot of incentive to sabotage any intelligence gathering which suggests that person from Y community might have a better chance. So once again, this actually brings an inbuilt incentive for a political party to rely on an external expert. Now these two problems are there, but what has really helped political parties is, and this is something you can't say with conclusive proof. Now we know that a socio-economic caste census happened in 2011. We know that almost everything in this country you do is now tagged to your Aadhaar database. There is a lot of digital footprint as far as voters are concerned in this country. And what we know for a fact is that all of that data is with the government. Now legally, government can make very, virtuous arguments that all that data is safe, etc. That is not how India works in practice. You should have more than enough reason to believe that all governments and by extension political parties have access to that data. And even if you've had one stint in government, you will have access to that data. And anybody who's done ground reporting in elections in this country in the post-2015 period, you will see that political parties and consultants hired by them use that data like anything. Basically, any official academic database in this country any political party to reckon with has a better database than that. They know exactly what is there. They know the social profile of the person, they know the electoral, the economic profile of the person, they know what voter in what colony is getting what benefit, what caste, all of that data is there. So what we have had is, from the demand side, that, there's a politician who wants this thing to be championed, where the local level politician, either from the perspective of caste or his or her own material interest, does not have an incentive to do so. And you have a supply side easing of this problem, that actually such a data exists. Pre-Aadhaar, pre-Jan Dhan Yojana, this database would never have existed in our country. So, and the only granular data you had in this country was basically census. That was something which was very difficult to use. And that is a very closely guarded data set. I mean, a political party can't run away with the census data set. It's much easier to run away with the welfare Aadhaar data set. So that's there. So this, I think, has led to targeted campaign during elections. And this, I think, has been an important factor in abetting the rise of these political consultants. And the other thing which has facilitated the rise of political consultants and professional managers, I think, goes back to my third factor. That almost every election in this country now is fought with money from big capital, not small capital. So you don't have the local level businessman in, say, Delhi, Sadar Bazaar or something giving you money. The biggest industrialists actually give you money. And if you have access to those kind of funds, if you're getting electoral donations, say 1,000 crores, 2,000 crores, etc., it's very easy to spare a couple of 100 crores on electoral consulting. Earlier, political parties would not have that kind of money. So, there is an electoral imperative for it, there is a data disruption which has actually facilitated it, and you actually have the money. So, that, thing is there. Now, I have basically tried to argue about what I think is, all of these arguments to my mind are actually rooted in what I call the economic base, the rise of political consultancy. Let me now go to the superstructure, because that is where the supply side problem, I think, becomes more interesting. Two back-to-back disruptions in this country, to my mind, have actually put a severe squeeze on the political social capital of what used to be the elite in this country. First is, the entire subaltern disruption in politics, after which, if you were basically an upper caste person, in very large parts of this country, you became persona non grata as far as fighting elections was concerned, because you would just not win. The other thing was the Mandal Commission, which basically equalized representation in the civil services. Before that, civil services were heavily upper caste dominated. The political disruption of the 70s and the bureaucratic disruption beginning 1990s, which has only increased, not decreased, I think completely marginalized the upper caste, who were also the earlier economic elites in Indian politics. So that is something which happened. Now, and this is once again, I have no value judgment about what reservations have done or not done. I'm not getting into that debate. But basically, had it not been for private capital, economic reforms and what private capital has done in this country, the upper caste would have actually seen a significant worsening in their material conditions. Because they would not have been able to go to politics, they would not have been able to go to the bureaucracy. It is only with economic reforms and the kind of white collar aristocracy in the private sector it has created that the upper caste has been able to stabilize, I would say even improve its fortunes. Another interesting thing which has happened is that I think at least for the first Mandal disruption, politics is something the upper caste do not hold a grudge about because they know its demography. For the first Mandal disruption, they do not really blame the Congress party because it was ultimately VP Singh who did it and all those things. But I think the second Mandal disruption, which is when Arjun Singh did the OBC reservation thing in central educational universities and all that, we were students here, I think they've never been able to forgive the Congress party. They, on that day, realized that the Congress party is something which is fundamentally inimical to upper caste interests. So that is one very important place of grudge which the upper caste of this country now holds vis-a-vis the Congress party. Hold this and go to other sources of literature. For example, I would recommend a lot of you, if you've not read it, to read Ravinder Kaur's book. This is not the IIT Ravinder Kaur. This is somebody who's located in Denmark. She's written a book called Brand New India. It's actually an ethnographic study of Davos. And the central argument of that book is, which Ravinder makes, is that basically, the kind of imagery which was sold of post-reform India, it's actually very monolithic imagery. And it actually fits very well with the kind of imagery which the Hindu right, actually wants to have of India. That's there. So, the rise of India story, the post-reform economic story, there's nothing which is fundamentally contradictory with what the Hindu right would want it to be. Add that with, say, scholarship by people like Akshay Mukund, who actually have, his book on Gita Press, I think it's a fascinating, archive-based research of how India's old business elite, and some of them are still very important business houses in India. If you don't want to call them communal, it's all right, but they're extremely conservative. So you've never had a very progressive base of capital in this country. So, add the fact that the new middle class actually thinks that the Congress is responsible for worsening their fortunes. That the kind of economic mobility they seek, the framework in which they seek it is actually something which is not fundamentally contradictory with the Hindu right. And then the character of capital itself in our country is not something which is committed to secularism or something. I mean, what Nehru would have wanted it to be. And then you have what Amol points out, that basically it is easy for the BJP to develop a framework where these so-called professionals would be wedded to their ideology. But it is extremely difficult for the Congress to find such people. Or any party which is, say, programmatically opposed to the BJP. So that's there. And so this is basically one thing. But there's another thing which I want to sort of point out is that Amog's book, because every academic project has to decide on an end point. And I think to my mind, perhaps the most fascinating aspect of electoral consultancy and its repercussions vis-a-vis Congress actually came in the 2023 cycle. So take Ashok Gehlot, for example, in Rajasthan. Did not do a bad job in government. If you look at all pre-poll surveys, people don't rate his government very badly. He had this guy called Design Box. I forgot his name, but he had an electoral consult. Yeah. The Rajasthan Congress party was mired in deep factionalism because there was Sachin Pilot on one hand and Ashok Gehlot on the other hand, and things so happened that basically 3-4 minutes max. Right? Ashok Gehlot managed to take control of the entire party. I went to report on those elections. A lot of candidature decisions were taken with factionalism in mind, and Ashok Gehlot managed to prevail on everything. And I think it was the single most reason why the Congress lost that election. What did this so-called professional consultant do? All this while, it was basically doing the equivalent of, just window dressing Ashok Gehlot. He had it, and, people from the Congress High Command told me that we are basically not being able to do anything. It is basically Ashok Gehlot who's running the show, and Ashok Gehlot, the person he is paid to for his political consultancy, he is running the show. So that's there, and I think that basically what is happening is that on the one hand you have a situation where the right wing is actually being able to so wed, say, professional campaign managers or political managers to their ideology. The non-right wing political spectrum is not being able to do so. But I think what is more important is that even in the non-right wing, there is a scope that these things will be used for factional purposes, and that will undermine the democratic structure within the non-BJP space, I would say, even more. Now, I will just make now. So let me just read it out from my last few points. Now, all this I think has an important political implication. Now, if the status quo of an elite political class using welfare to legitimize its political appeal is to continue, a large part of the elite, perhaps, except maybe in states like Tamil Nadu, where politics and public memory is very different, would not have the superstructural ideological initiative, incentive to sort of do business with any non-BJP parties. That's there. And even ideologically promiscuous parties such as the AAP will have a shelf life. The reason AAP lost these elections is the middle class didn't vote for them. The poor have actually voted for them in very large numbers. What does it entail for our politics today? I think for something like the Congress, it basically entails reinventing a more radical political appeal than passive delivery of welfare measures. Because, they will eventually, if they want to do well, to my mind, have to do away with political consultants and develop a more organic leadership. But that would mean or require a purge of the existing leadership. A lot of it is basically, from the days when the Congress used to have power in this country. They just can't be in the opposition. And I think unless the Congress is able to do that, I don't think it will be able to sort of revive its fortunes. And, to conclude, let me say that the growing importance of the tribe of, technocratic backroom managers in Indian politics, to my mind, is nothing more than an attempt to make a moribund political economy look more animated. These are guys who are not changing the fundamental nature of our political economy. Concerns or celebration of this phenomenon, and this is not like for a moment to sort of undermine Amog's work, because I think it makes a very important contribution to the literature, is to miss the larger point. The larger problem with our political economy, what you're seeing in terms of the Prashant Kishores of the world is basically just a tip of the iceberg. Thank you very much.